Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 12, 2024 Form-Based Code Area Working Group meeting. We are holding, my name is Daniel Weir. I am the liaison from the Planning Commission and area and AWG chair. We're holding a virtual public meeting tonight, and all participants are joining us remotely. I'd like to briefly orient everyone to the virtual environment and cover a few specifics about how the meeting will be run. Tonight's meeting is available to join from the Form-Based Code Area Working Group webpage, the county's events calendar, and at the top of today's agenda. Additionally, there's a dial-up phone option for those who wish to use it. And I will keep my eye on the member list to find out whether or not, to keep an eye on whether or not anyone is dialing in. If anyone loses internet connectivity, please reconnect with us by phone. And please, if you are with us via Teams directly, please keep your video turned off and your microphone muted until you are called upon. I also ask that you turn off any sound through any other devices around you to minimize interference. These tools are located as icons on your Teams command bar, and if you don't see that, you can try tapping or clicking in the center of the screen and it will pop up. When called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that's located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. If you're dialing in by phone, please press *6 to unmute. When you are finished, please remute your microphone. We don't have anyone by phone, but again, I will be keeping my eye on the participants list to see whether or not we have any phone numbers pop in. The meeting chat is active for participants who need technical assistance only, and it should not be used for discussion, for public comment, for questions about agenda items, or requests for more information. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony periods. Additional notes for AWG members. If AWG members wish to be recognized to speak on an item, please turn your video feed on, raise your hand using the Teams function, and leave your microphone muted. I will use both the video feeds and the raised hand feature as an indicator of who would like to speak. Once you've been recognized, you may unmute. Once you have completed speaking, then please turn your video feed back off. I don't believe that we have anyone. I still don't believe we have anyone who's joined by phone. But again, I will keep my eye on it. If we do, I don't believe we have any public speakers, but for the record, if anyone does wish to give public comment, will be called upon at the end of the meeting, and your time will be muted. You will be muted when your time is concluded. And lastly, as a reminder, this is a public forum, and today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. And as usual, all information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. I will go to Ms. Sontag to introduce this evening's item. Thank you.
Thank you. Give me just a second to share my screen. Got too many presentations open. All right, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Yes.
I can.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, Olivia Sontag with the Planning Division. I think everybody's pretty familiar here. I'm also joined this evening by Matt Matuzik with the Planning Division, Melissa Danowski with our Housing Division, Robert Gibson with DES, and Jeremy from Parks. We also have the Jared Lynch team on, and they'll be speaking briefly in just a little bit. So we do have about 40 slides. Hopefully you had a chance to review those ahead of time, but we'll try to move through these fairly quickly. I'll be covering the first portion of these. Then you'll hear from the Jared Lynch team about their latest updates to the proposed site redevelopment plan. And then Matt Matuzik will wrap us up with the policy recommendations and remaining schedule. So I won't spend much time on these background slides. Most of this is going to be familiar to the AWG after having been a part of the working group, and also just all of the renovation use permits that you've seen this past year. But I do want to highlight that you'll be happy to see all the maps are oriented north on this slide and all other slides you'll see this evening. This is the 62-acre site. It's located on Columbia Pike between 4 Mile Run Drive and George Mason. This also includes the Penske site on that southeast corner of Columbia Pike and George Mason, and the triangular section that's just south of George Mason Drive. Barcroft Apartments was built in two different phases between 1940 and 1950. It includes 8 different sections of garden apartments, totaling 1,335 units, mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms. So for some background, Barcroft Apartments was listed for sale in 2021. It was risking the displacement of many residents. So Arlington County and Amazon provided loans to Jar Lynch to purchase the property, and commitments were made to preserve the 1,335 units for 99 years, up to 60% AMI, resulting in no displacement of those existing residents. So additionally, rents were frozen in 2022 for residents living at the property as of December of 2021 during the acquisition. And then annual increases, which started in 2023, are capped at 3% up to a maximum of 60% AMI. And in December of 2023, Jar Lynch and the county also committed to deliver at least 10% of units as affordable to households earning up to 30% AMI, so meeting those deeper affordability needs. The loan agreement also includes commitments to provide a minimum of 10% Type A accessible units for the affordable units within both renovated homes and developed in new buildings. So across the two, there will be 10% of those Type A units. And then again, this is going to be very familiar, but as some of this long-term planning continues, the Jar Lynch team has advanced some of these renovation and preservation projects within the neighborhood's form-based code conservation areas, which is not envisioned for redevelopment. So these use permits are consistent with the both the existing vision and the proposed vision we plan to take to the board this July. So these 4 renovation projects include a total of 15 of the garden apartment buildings, about 359 committed affordable units. And it helps to advance some of these renovation projects so that they can deliver them in the near term for residents. And some of the highlights here that you've already heard about are in-unit washer dryers, renovated kitchens and bathrooms, new mechanical systems, HVAC systems, repaired and replaced roofs, outdoor amenity areas where possible, and then those Type A accessible units and ADA parking where feasible. So following the December 2023 approval of the Affordable Housing Financing Plan, the county began outlining the process for the land use analysis with 2 primary objectives. The first was to build upon and update the vision of the Neighborhoods Area Plan adopted in 2012, and then the Revitalization Plan, which was adopted in 2005. Then to support the recently adopted Financing and Affordability Plan, but also incorporating additional site analysis and information that we now have from Jar Lynch. And then a second objective of this process was to explore existing and new tools to ensure the updated vision and commitments to site improvements are clearly documented and can be successfully implemented as part of a phased strategy for this 62-acre site. So from there, we formed the Barcroft Working Group to assist the county in reviewing the Jar Lynch proposed site redevelopment plan with the purpose of ensuring key stakeholders were involved in the planning process, also to start to identify and resolve any community and resident concerns, and then for working group members to act as liaisons to keep their respective neighborhoods and organizations informed of these ongoing discussions. So as you all know, these groups included the core AWG membership, chaired by the planning commissioner, all of the civic associations and Columbia Pike Partnership. We identified key commissions and committees that we wanted to make sure we heard from, and then different community organizations. And then alongside that review, we've had staff support from CPHD, from our Department of Environmental Services, and Department of Parks and Recreation. So after taking these objectives and this outline to the county board in January, we started this working group engagement, which started in February with our kickoff meeting. We had the online feedback form that was held for a month or so. And then we started covering those 4 different topic areas, starting with the conservation areas and redevelopment area balance, and then moving on to transportation, public open space and natural areas, and then finally the urban design and transitions topic. So we gathered feedback on all of those. Held an open house for residents in the broader community at the Barcroft Apartments leasing office back in May. And then finally, we wrapped up on May 13th just to get final feedback and provide some of the policy recommendations that staff was drafting. So in between that final working group meeting, staff and Jared Lynch have been working to address all of that final feedback that we received and incorporate that into the proposed plans. Jared Lynch has also been working on incorporating those changes into the MFDB document. Staff has been working on finalizing those policy updates, which you'll see later in this presentation, and then also looking at the near-term schedule for the fall. So here we are now as we begin this upcoming meeting schedule. There are 3 different actions that we plan to bring to the county board for their consideration on July 20th. So the first action will be adopting those addendums to the 2012 Neighborhoods Area Plan and 2005 Revitalization Plan. We'll also be looking to authorize advertisements of amendments to the GLUP and the MTP. The final consideration of those will occur later in 2024, but the amendments to those plans will be reflective of what we're updating in the Neighborhoods Area Plan and Revitalization Plan. And then the third item we're taking to the county board in July is looking for approval of the Jared Lynch Master Financing and Development Plan. So we started on Monday, bringing these, the consideration of these items to the LRPC, and then we're here this evening, and we'll continue on this meeting schedule for the next month or so. So the MFDP is a fairly new concept for many of us. So this slide helps to explain generally what it includes. We found that due to the level of investment, the magnitude of development and renovation, and then the multi-year phasing plan timing, that an MFDP would serve as a tool to document the Affordable Housing Financing Plan, the phasing plan, and the vision for site redevelopment. So this document is not regulatory. There may be, or there will be, amendments to the form-based code in the second half of the year to implement the vision that's established in the MFDP. And then you can see here just some of the elements that are included in each of the, different kind of larger elements of this plan. So these planning principles help identify some of the core community values that should guide decisions on future changes to Barcroft Apartments. It also helps interpret the intentions of the broader county policies and regulations as they apply to Barcroft. And then the principles are also unique to each of the 4 topics that we covered with the Barcroft working group. So I won't read through these, but we can certainly go back and revisit these principles if needed, but these will be included in the MFDP document and will help just guide future visioning and some of the amendments that we're looking at making in the second half of the year to the form-based codes. So similarly, the MFDP addresses each of those topic areas, which are also reflected in the exhibits that you'll see in just a minute. But these are the kind of, at a high level, the 4 topics that are addressed. So embedded within these, we cover the preservation of the historic entrance, emphasis on the historic spine of South Thomas Street, the intent to register Barcroft as a historic district, what the resident amenity center might include, and then why and where there was an expansion of development opportunities. Under urban design, it emphasizes how topography was utilized on the site, resolving any building height discrepancies in the existing codes, how transitions will occur to conservation areas, and then just ensuring general design compatibility between the redeveloped and the conservation areas. The multimodal transportation network and parking addresses vehicular, bicycle, pedestrian circulation, and how that should occur for safe user experience, as well as the intent for the parking plan for both the preserved and new development areas. And then we also have a breakdown of the different types of public open space, both in the east node, west node, the preserved natural areas that are identified in the form-based code, as well as some newly introduced concepts such as a biophilic pedestrian pathway through the site, and then also looking at tree canopy targets that we have for the different elements of the site. So kind of pulling this all together, these again are the three elements that are under county board consideration. And then this just gives you a visual of, in the background, some of those renovation use permits that have been advanced, again, consistent with the existing vision and the proposed vision going to the board. And then we do anticipate a new development use permit being submitted this summer. So with that, I'll pass this off to, I believe, Lauren Riley, who's going to cover some of the Jar Lynch proposal.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lauren Riley with Walsh Colucci. We represent the applicant, Jar Lynch Real Estate Partners. And joining me tonight is also David Hildy and Greg Ward with Jar Lynch. So thanks, Olivia, for giving us that overview, the in-depth overview of kind of where we started with that historic acquisition of Barcroft and where we've been to date. And looking at kind of the list of everyone who's here tonight, most of you have been present and have participated in some, if not all, those working group meetings that we've had over the past 5 months. So we've really appreciated the feedback that we've gotten from you all. It's been valuable through this process. And then this draft master finance and development plan that we have before you now, that incorporates in response to the feedback that we received from you all, as well as other stakeholders and from county staff. And then getting into the exhibits here, we're going to highlight kind of those main areas that Olivia just noted that the MFDP addresses. And these are all very similar, not the same exhibits that you saw last month at our May working group meeting. Though, as Olivia mentioned, we've rotated those for consistency now. So Columbia Pike is at the top of your screen there. And then graphically, they've been revised just to more consistently show all of the proposed site development on the same base there for consistency purposes throughout the document. So starting off here with the conservation area, changes on the left-hand side is that summary of the conservation area and new development areas. So that light green color is the area where buildings are intended to be preserved and renovated as well. You all have been hearing our renovation use permits as we've kind of gone through the past 4 of those over the past year or so. And in that purple hatched area to the top left of your screen, those are the areas where we were proposing to revise the form-based codes conservation area to add back buildings to the preserve to the conservation area. So we're proposing to preserve these additional buildings here to keep that historic Barcroft gateway intact as you come off Columbia Pike. And that's going to contribute to that historic Barcroft gateway, that north-south spine that's connecting you from Columbia Pike down to South 4 Mile Run. And then on the right-hand side, those areas hatched in black, those are the areas where we're proposing to remove those buildings from the conservation area and utilize those for development opportunities for for new development, consistent with kind of the overall vision of the form-based code to build out around the edges of Barcroft while keeping kind of the heart, the center of Barcroft preserved. And on the right, you can see where the proposed new development areas are. They're outlined in, or they're shaded in blue there, and they represent the bringing in from the commercial form-based code on the west side. We're bringing in that area, that little triangle on the west side from the form-based code into the neighborhood's form-based code to keep it consistent with the rest of Barcroft. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, we're bringing in that what we call the Penske site in as well. And then generally locating new urban development on the edges where it's most appropriate. Go to the next slide. And then here's the information on our proposed transportation network for vehicles and bikes. We'll get to the pedestrians in just a moment. But on the left-hand side, you'll see the proposed bicycle circulation. So we're going to improve bicycle access throughout the site by connecting Barcroft to kind of the outer bicycle network that the county has to the north, east, and west, and ultimately connect you to the WNOD trail. So you can see starting on the right side at the Penske site, that's going to be our main east-west connection that bikes will be able to follow to Thomas Street, continuing up through 12th onto Wakefield. And then from that point, you can either go north to Columbia Pike or south towards South 4 Mile Run Drive and the WNOD trail. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see our proposed vehicular network. And again, providing that main east-west connection with the 12th Street there, kind of starting at Penske site, running all the way east-west through the site, providing that kind of critical connection that's lacking there today. Also, we'll be providing North Taylor Street connection coming off Columbia Pike, going south, connecting to the road network in Columbia Pike, dispersing that traffic to get some folks off of Columbia Pike and South George Mason Drive. So we could go to the next slide. Here's kind of a quick summary of parking, and I know we've all been discussing it. It's been a hot topic of the past few of our meetings. On the left side is here where we've attempted to summarize the existing parking supply for the existing units in Barcroft. So this is what it looks like today. The areas shaded in red are private parking areas where residents have access to parking spaces today, and the blue areas are those on-street parking spaces that are essentially reserved for Barcroft residents because they utilize most of those spaces, on-street spaces there. And then on the right-hand side is that future parking supply that you'll see once the new development is all built out. So we will retain kind of that 1-to-1 ratio for the existing units to remain, and they'll have access to all the parking there in the red and the blue shaded areas. And then the new development buildings will meet the requirements of the form-based code on their individual sites in their own garages in accordance with the form-based code. Next slide. And then on to open space and our natural preserved areas here. On the left-hand side, we can see this exhibit's meant to mainly focus on the public parks and the preserved natural areas. So this is something we all really worked on with you all for the first couple months, was open space, kind of bringing it out from the edges of Barcroft to be more internal. So we feel like more folks from Barcroft can access the site and it feels more part of the Barcroft campus. So we've got 3 proposed public parks starting off on the west side. There'll be a park that serves that west node there that's off of Wakefield Drive. And then moving along 12th Street to the right, we've got another proposed mini park right there at 12th Street and Taylor. And then kind of rounding us out there as you come in off of Columbia Pike onto South George Mason Drive is that third proposed public park, which will kind of mirror the setback that's on the west-hand side there of that new development. and kind of serve as almost another gateway into the new development area of Barcroft. And then as you turn right onto 12th Street, you'll experience that new 12th Street section, which will have a walking bike path, shared use path there, as well as areas for vehicles and bikes. So that's going to be a really nice kind of biophilic pathway, east-west connection through the site that's almost anchored by those new open spaces. And on the whole, we're providing 0.3 additional acres of open space beyond what's already envisioned in the plan. And then the same similar approach applies to those preserved natural areas. We've been able to work on that slope stabilization there on the south side of the property and confirm that we are going to be able to plant some trees and plant that back to the level where it's considered a preserved natural area. So the areas we are continuing to keep as preserved natural areas are in that light green, and the areas where we're adding more are in the dark green. So again, providing more preserved natural area than was originally envisioned in the plan, kind of taking advantage of some of those unused spaces in the existing Barcroft area where that could not be otherwise utilized for paths or parking. And then on the right-hand side is really meant to emphasize the biophilic paths through Barcroft that we're going to create through, combinations of lighting and signage, maybe some educational opportunities throughout, enhance the pathways throughout that site, as well as providing some low-level native plantings throughout that kind of green biophilic path area. And then the next slide. This is our final exhibit hitting on our last topic that I think we discussed, which was urban design, mainly focused on building heights and transitions, how we're getting from this new urban development on the edges down into the historic existing units to remain. You can see it's color coded there, kind of with our highest density, the most stories on the exterior Barcroft, stepping down inward toward the existing units to remain. And on the right-hand side, you can see the diagram for how, what the form-based code calls neighborhood manners, how will be, from a massing perspective, new construction will step down toward buildings in the conservation area. So where you're within 50 feet of an existing building, we'll have to step down to 2 levels there. And then if you're more than 50 feet, the new construction can remain at 6 stories, but of course we'll be tapering these buildings and being sensitive to the conservation areas we move forward, and we'll have to comply with the architectural requirements of the form-based code. So on the whole, to provide just some concluding comments from our folks, we've been really pleased with the outcome of the working group process. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot these massing renderings, the pretty pictures that kind of show the result of all of that massing and design work that we've done to date. We'll emphasize here, these are illustrative renderings only, kind of meant to show the mass of what is the potential here for these new development areas on the east and the west, how we're able to take advantage of the topography across the site, and locate new development kind of on the east and west where it's closest to other new development as well. And then again, just concluding, we thank you all for your participation so far throughout the working group process, and we valued your feedback so far, and we think this plan is responsive to that feedback, and ultimately this plan kind of, heard before, it's going to stitch together that fabric of the existing units to remain with that new development on the edges there. And we believe it'll, at the end of the day, create a real sense of community, real sense of place here at Barcroft. And so we're excited to continue moving forward with this process and begin to actually implement this vision in the next year or so. So thank you, guys.
Thanks, Lauren. I can pick up and carry the next series of slides. Good evening, everybody. What we wanted to do, in addition to highlighting where the MFDP proposal is, and I think you all had a chance to review the entirety of it now that we have the consolidated PDF version, We also wanted to provide some timely updates on where we are on the policy side of the equation so that the guidance that we have in our plans begin to reflect where we ended up with the MFDP. So this slide should look familiar because we've continued to, over the last few months, summarize all the different policies that are involved in this review. A lot of the ones that you see in black on the left do represent county-wide guidance and are not as specific to Barcroft. And we've actually relied on them to allow the MFDP to evolve a little bit and begin to reflect some of those where needed. And that's what led to some of the updates along the way. However, the top 4 that are in blue on the left are specific enough where anytime the vision changes, and it has for Barcroft, these also have to be updated to keep up and consistently reflect what we need to see moving forward, whether that's in terms of preservation, new development. We want to make sure all these different plans, no matter where you find them and what page you're on, accurately point you to the updated guidance for what should happen next. So if we look at the next slide, this gives you a sense of just kind of high-level summary of what actually changed. Why do we need to update those documents? And there's obviously some tallying up of additional committed affordable units, which is important and critical. But the even minor shift in terms of what gets preserved, where redevelopment can happen, how high the development can go, the adjustments in the public mini parks and the preserved areas, and even introducing some additional targets for tree canopy, as well as the planned street and bicycle network. So all those things really have to say the same thing, no matter which document you reference moving forward. So we're going to continue to update this as needed and for clarity, but I think it's good to help track some of the justification for why we need to update our policies. So in the next slide, you can start to see, and we wanted to, I think before we previewed the direction we're heading into and then start to foreshadow what to expect, I think we are now basically at a point where we have begin to produce those documents, and in the next couple of weeks, you'll see draft copies of it. But starting with that earlier form-based code, or I'm sorry, revitalization plan that only targeted the commercial corners of the property and the other commercial nodes on Columbia Pike. Here we're essentially going to extract the guidance that previously was called for Barcroft's edges, and we're going to say that that guidance now exists in the other plan, the neighborhoods area plan. And as Olivia was mentioning, the intent there is to make sure that all of that is cohesively located in just one document, one reference point, speaking the same language, and kind of prevents everybody, whether it's staff, you all, the development community, from going back and forth and trying to make sense of what are we supposed to follow depending on where we are on this very large site. So we're going to start adding notes throughout that earlier revitalization plan that point you to this updated document, and that's where a lot of this information is going to exist. On the next slide, you can start to see in that earlier, more recent document, the neighborhoods area plan, we do cover a lot: building heights, transportation network, open space. And as that information begins to expand and cover those 2 commercial corners, which are kind of, in white right now, you'll start to see, okay, well, this is what needs to happen if we're supposed to mirror where the MFDP ended up. So we're going to go through a few different examples to see, so that you can see where the maps have ended up. And I think you'll start to see the approach there. Starting with open space, on the left is the existing map. And again, carving out those 2 corners where it's kind of difficult to figure out what's supposed to happen as you get to Columbia Pike and George Mason or Fulmar Run. And on the right, you can see how we've now expanded that vision, reallocated the now 3 mini parks throughout the property, kind of help identify and expand the treatment along 12th Road, and then also make sure that the necessary adjustments to those natural preserve areas, the dark green, would also be reflected to mirror where we have ended up with the MFDP. So this basically should look like, and hopefully it does, as some of the earlier exhibits we just looked at in the presentation, but using the same terminology and legend that's already in that plan. We don't want to introduce brand new maps. We simply want to modify the ones that everybody is used to and just make sure that they reflect the current vision for Barcroft. And then similarly, with respect to urban design, the distinction between various heights, you can see here, once the color coding has expanded to cover all of Barcroft, including the Penske site on the east side of George Mason, you can see here how we are relying on that same legend that's already in the neighborhoods plan to indicate how we are gradually stepping up and stepping down from those two corners and gradually transitioning into what is now a revised conservation area, the preserved portion of the property with that yellow and gray hatch. So again, another reference point, and this will be a critical building block for the second half of the year as we then codify this in the neighborhood's form-based code. So these would be very critical maps that allow us to accurately capture this beyond July. And then lastly, I think we have the transportation map, which on the left, I think indicated, as you've seen, the previous guidance for both vehicular and bicycle connections. We've now revised that based on not just what's happening with the MFDP, but also in recognition of some of those by-right townhomes that have been delivered along Columbia Pike. And you can see here, somewhat simplified, but also, I think, accurately reflecting where the MFDP is in terms of those two networks. So that takes care of the neighborhood's area plan. We're not done, though, because there are other elements that I think still depict a lot of the very detailed information. This exhibit, I think we've actually showed in May, so you should be already expecting that some subtle adjustments to the general land use plan map are going to be needed. If we look at the next slide, that gives you a comparison of before and after. Actually, let me go back one. There we go. So I think if we read the notes, you can see the adjustments are going to be needed to the black line that distinguishes between the two designations. 24 is the newer neighborhoods area. Number 8 is the commercial one, the earlier planning effort. So the updated maps will be revising those. And in the background, updating the white lines, which represent the street network, both existing and planned, that is to be delivered. And then those two small black triangles that you see there, those are the future public spaces. Those will be revised in their location, and we're going to add a third one on the Penske site to match what the MFDP was calling for. So again, subtle changes. We're not changing the underlying designations, but enough where even if you find this document, the guidance will be consistent in terms of what to expect. And then similarly, the last document is the master transportation plan. And here we have two maps that speak to the planned street locations. Usually these hatches are pretty general throughout the county, but here, because the form-based code is so specific, we did identify and went as far as to show where those planned streets would be. So as we eliminate those, some are being reconfigured and realigned to match the MFDP. And this gives you a sense of what those will look like. And then lastly, on the MTP side, we also have the bike network, which indicates where we are in terms of the changes, primarily on 12th Road, but also making sure that we tie into Wakefield and on the west corner, 4 Mile and Minor. So all of these will be packaged together later this month in draft versions of the plans and the maps. So as we gradually show you kind of what to expect, by the end of this month, you're actually going to be seeing those draft policy documents, and we're getting closer and closer to finalizing them as additional committees and commissions get a chance to review those. So we talked about how we get to July and what to expect. In terms of the second half of the year, I think we began to preview this back in May, but it's probably good to revisit in that several different things are going to happen. We're going to obviously build upon the actions that are taking place in July and use that information to then begin to review the adjustments that are necessary to the neighborhood's form-based code and even the commercial form-based code as we kind of address some of that cleanup but also to amend a lot of the guidance that's in place for Barcroft Apartments. As that happens, we're also going to be reviewing another use permit, but this time for new construction. We haven't had one of those, right? So far, it's only been for the renovation side. But with the MFDP approved, we can now actually be, and the vision documents approved, we can now begin to look at that new construction use permit for one of the buildings that's shown on the MFDP. And these will come together near the end of the year as we amend the code and consider final approval for that new construction use permit. And at that time, we're going to bring back those GLUP and MTP amendments, which we are only advertising in July. They're not actually changing, but we want to make sure we get through the form-based code changes and verify there's no further edits needed until that work concludes. So this gives you a high-level sense of what to expect. Key takeaway, I guess, is we're going to keep meeting. So you're not done yet. Sorry. But this gives you a sense of more or less what to expect. And we are probably going to have additional AWG meetings because fortunately or unfortunately, Barcroft is not the only game in town for this year. And there are other things that are being reviewed. So lots more to review as 2024 keeps going. Next slide. On the topic of Barcroft, though, one thing that's probably not emphasized enough is a kind of a separate analysis that's happening in parallel with everything we just mentioned, and that's the one that involves Doctor's Run. What we realize is that this segment of the property potentially presents a lot of opportunities and ways to, I think, highlight and distinguish the current stream that's there, but it also presents some challenges with respect to flood resiliency and risk management that we really need to study carefully and go through some regulatory assessments that are required before anything else can be done. So part of the reason why you might not see as much of this segment of the property highlighted in our policy changes or the MFDP is because there is a significant level of analysis that's still ahead of us that we've recognized throughout the process that simply won't be able to be concluded in July. So we started that work and it's continuing behind the scenes, but sometime in the fall/winter, we do expect to bring back initial analysis. And at that point, we'll be able to verify with the updated data whether or not various opportunities could still move forward or if additional changes to the MFDP might be warranted based on what we find and continue to work with other staff and Jar Lynch. Next slide. All right, I think you know who we all are, and that should wrap up the presentation, I think.
Thank you, everyone. We have a very small. There's a lot of information. Do we? Well, first, let me ask. We've got Ms. Riley here. Ms. Riley, is there anything else that you wanted to go over or present?
Hi, thanks. No, our presentation through the main part was was meant to be our main presentation. We're available for questions though throughout.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure before I open the floor, and we've got a small number of people here. So let me just do that. I'll open the floor for questions. We've got I believe we're advertised until 9. I definitely don't think we need that long, and we probably don't need until 8:30. But let me open the floor for any questions. Mr. Miltenberger, we'll start with you.
Okay, let's see, that was fast. Yeah, I have a question regarding the units that are going to be for 30% or less of AMI. I believe it's 134 units. And what is the distribution of those units going to be throughout the property? And how will they be spread around?
Yeah, so it's anticipate. So I'm Melissa Danowski with the Housing Division, and so the 30% AMI units really are meant to be in spread around across the property. So in the renovation units and also the new construction units, it's anticipated that starting with the second renovation use permit that was approved a few months ago, I think that we'll start to see some 30% AMI units actually in the projects, as we're able to then look at the financing and figure out the affordable program for each individual phase of reno or new construction.
So does that mean that the 134 units will be coming online gradually throughout the renovation?
Correct. Yeah, it will be phased throughout the renovation, but also as new construction is being built as well. So. Correct.
Oh, well, that's a question I did wonder. Will some of those units actually be in some of the new construction as well? Oh,
Yes.
I didn't realize that. Well, thank you. Okay, that's very good to know. All right. All right, that's all I have for right now.
Great. We'll go to Ms. Dye.
Thank you. I've got two questions. The first one is slide 20 on parking. And in looking at everything and looking at the differences between the taking buildings down and removing the current parking areas, I was just curious if you all have tried to make an attempt at determining is there in particular what the impact will be on the buildings that are staying. They may be losing the current parking areas that those folks are used to having for their buildings. So I'm just curious, have you all tried to figure out what the impact is, and is there going to be an increase or a decrease in terms of the interior parking, surface parking, the impact that it would have on the buildings that are remaining? I hope that makes a little bit of sense, but and this would really be a whole lot of plussing and minusing building by building and area by area. But do you all have a rough idea if there's going to be, in particular, if there would actually be a decrease in the current surface parking for the buildings that are remaining?
I can take that one. Thanks, Linda, for your question. And you're very accurate. It's a lot of plus and minusing throughout the different nodes that we've looked at. Our team has been considering the proximity of surface spaces to remain to existing buildings to remain, and we've tried to the extent that we can to preserve parking for those existing units close to where they currently park today. So this plan represents that effort. I don't have the numbers in front of me currently. I can't speak to whether there's a net decrease or increase of kind of surface parking proximate to those existing buildings to remain, but we are keeping the ratio the same. And so that's something that we did take into consideration. That is important for us to continue to provide parking close to where folks currently live.
That's great. Glad to hear that. My second question is on slide 22, the southeast corner of the Pike. The southeast corner of the Pike and George Mason, the Penske area. That's slated for 8 stories plus. Can you give an idea of what kind of impact there would be, how close the property for Barcroft is to the current apartment buildings that are right next door in the Quebec apartments? Do you have a feel for the kind of pullbacks you might have to do? Because it's not clear to me where the property line is for the Quebec apartments, and the buildings may or may not be real close to their property line. And so in terms of the neighborhood manners, a possible 8+ story building, do you have an idea of how that would play out next to the Quebec apartments?
Linda, we haven't yet gotten into that level of detail yet in terms of actually citing a proposed building and determining its proximity to the Quebec apartments. But I'm glad you hit on the neighborhood manners part of the form-based code because those measures apply whether your neighbors are within the form-based code or not. So those, that's kind of meant to protect all residential properties around neighborhood form-based code development areas. So that's something that we'll look at when we get a little more specific with the future use permit for that building. Matt, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Just a potentially clarifying comment, since I was trying to interpret the 8+ reference there from Linda. I think the 8+ only shows up in the legend on this graphic purely to minimize or avoid the rainbow that exists on the other map, where we have like 10 different colors. So you'll see here this purple category is a catch-all for anything 8 stories and above, but the actual number of stories is shown here. So the 8 represents what we expect as a maximum on the Penske site. And you can see, 8 on the edges of the George Mason buildings before we transition to 6, and then even lower. But I just wanted to clarify that in case there was any perception that Penske site could go above 8 stories.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Finally, a general final comment. The labeling of 12th Road is consistently showing up as 12th Street. And I don't know if for those of us who go way back in word processing, there used to be global replace technique you could use. And unfortunately, there's a whole lot of places and a whole lot of descriptions where it shows up as 12th Street and it needs to be changed to 12th Road. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Mr. McCullough.
All right, good evening. I'd like to piggyback on that comment about about parking, just an observation. So if we go to slide 20, again, just a moment. I had the same question about the transition and losing spaces during construction and how that process goes. I understand it's very complicated and these are far down the road, but I did want to point out the one area that I think is going to be the most difficult of that is the 2 buildings that are on George Mason and potentially the one across in the Penske site. Those are large buildings, and they will take during construction the area that is the most. I'm circling with my mouse, and you won't see, but there's a kind of a large square. Just go up 12th Road, and there's a large parking area. Go onto the existing one. There, down a little bit to the right. That figural space, that big square, is a lot of parking there. That's I don't know, a couple hundred spaces, and that part will be taken out during construction of those 2 larger buildings, and whatever the building ratios are. So you're losing a couple hundred there. I don't know how it'll all lay out, and I think that. And I know this is down the line. This is probably years away, but that is likely, to my mind, to be the time where there's the highest stress in the parking supply, because that is a very large parking area. So, and I don't see how any other place where more parking comes online. So, I mentioned this in the last one. I'd still like to see more detailed parking analysis. I know it's complicated, but and I'm sure we'll see more detailed parking analysis as specific buildings come on. But again, I'm seeing a bunch of red lines that this is parking, but is that parallel parking? Is it not? I'd like to have a sense of what the numbers really are. But and I know that's a deep analysis and it's probably premature, but I do think it's still a key point. And I'm not saying that this is not going to be adequate. I'm just saying I'd like to see the analysis. I'm an analytical guy. I have a second really tiny, sort of similar to the last speaker point. Can we look at slide 34? There we go. I know this is just a personal one. So we've got South Taylor Street coming here on this master transportation map, And it does this little jog here. Again, I'm using my mouse and you're not seeing it, but it does this little jog here to align with another street. But it doesn't really do that jog. It's as straight as an arrow since I live on South Taylor Street. And so I don't know. I just wanted to point it out. That seems I've seen it on other maps as dead straight. It doesn't exist that way. Maybe it was previously planned to realign with a new Taylor Street, but it doesn't, and I don't think it will. Right there, yeah. So I just pointed that out to make for consistency and accuracy.
So this is Robert Gibson with Arlington DES Transportation. That segment of South Taylor Street that was previously planned with this new plan would be removed from the MTP. So
Right.
I don't know if that answers your
I'm saying
desire, or if you're really referring to the jog on the north side.
I'm referring to the jog on the north side. I think the jog shows something to align with a street that's no longer going to exist, and the jog doesn't exist now. And all that construction that's going on, it's basically straight. Is all I'm saying. So when this map, shows removing of the portion south of Columbia Pike, it should also show the street north of Columbia Pike as straight, because that's the way it exists.
Oh, I understand. Yeah, I think this goes back to the original form-based code approval and some of the map changes that occurred then that put the jog in, and you're suggesting that jog may never occur.
I would assume not. If the southern portion is not going to be built, and all of this work that's going on now, reworking the sidewalks and doing all this stuff, if they're not doing it now, can't imagine they're doing it in any future time. So anyway,
I'm still not sure I'm following what I guess what matters is that Mr. Gibson and Ms. Sontag and Mr. Matuzik follow, but you're saying that the form-based code anticipates somehow aligning Taylor Street, and that alignment is no longer possible. So show it in its current route on the form-based code.
Assuming that, yes, there's no reason
areas plan, I mean,
jog if it's not going to connect with the southern portion, and I can't imagine that it's you would do the jog to not align with a street that doesn't exist. So I assume that it's not going to happen, and therefore it shouldn't be shown.
Right. Well, and neither the Whitmore nor the condo are going to go anywhere anytime in the next 50 years. So
correct.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Point. We can consider that.
That's it. Thank you.
That's consistent with, I think that's consistent, Mr. Matuzik, with the feedback that I gave last night about, we don't need to change the, while we don't need to go comport the neighborhoods plan illustration map with what's been done since really anywhere else. It's still a good idea to comport with what we know is going to be the case, or is the case here, I guess, right?
Well, I think it's a rare example of a potential update to the guidance that is outside of the Barcroft departments, and therefore kind of outside of our scope. But because of the elimination of the road that Taylor Street was trying to realign with, if that opportunity is no longer possible because we are now removing that segment from Barcroft Apartments,
right?
Should that depiction still continue, or reflect something more current?
Right. The instant project also seems to preclude that part of the vision, right? Is what you're saying. Like it's not part of the project.
I think it was drawn in a way that anticipated and required both north and south segments of that street on either side of Columbia Pike to be delivered in a way that we are now beginning to depict differently. So
is probably precluded. Is probably for all practical purposes precluded. Yeah, I'm on the same page with y'all now. Thank you. Apologies for taking the longer time to get there. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. Mr. Miltenberger, back to you. Mr. Miltenberger, you may be on mute. Well, you are on mute. You may be speaking while on mute.
There we go. Okay. I was looking at the wrong thing here. Yeah, I do have a question. I was hoping to hear from the representative from the Barcroft Resident Association in terms of, we've heard from, I specifically remember one meeting before where the question of parking was brought up, and now parking has been brought up again tonight. So I was wondering if that satisfies their needs for parking. So who is the representative from the Barcroft Resident Association on the call?
That would be me, BSCO. I think that's, yeah, I mean, parking is an issue. I guess I'm not sure exactly what your question is, but for me, I don't think there's enough information yet to have a clear idea. I understand the parking ratios. The ratio is going to be 1-to-1 instead of 0.85. That's for the existing. The new buildings have their own parking ratio. It's really that transition during construction. This is assumedly going to be under construction for something on the order of many multiple years, right? 10, 15, 20? Which means that the full number, if you do the analysis and you say, oh, look, we're going to have enough parking, that doesn't happen until 2035, 2045, whatever the date is. It's that period in between when you lose existing parking and the new parking hasn't come online that is not clear to me, and I don't think, you know, I understand it's a complicated process to figure out, but I can't say that it's, you know, I mean, what is required will satisfy me because that's what's required. But I think we need to think a little more in depth about the sequencing and timing of all of this. So it's just not there yet. And at some point, I don't know when it happens, but we'll stay involved and make sure that, you know, there's not this point where you lose 200 spaces and then suddenly everyone is, you know,
well, I guess for me, it would just be helpful to know when that might be planned in terms of for the redevelopment of the site, because right now it's just sort of this nebulous period in the future there will be enough parking. But could we get some idea? It doesn't have to be tonight, but could we be provided some sort of a timeline of when the parking, you know, what the maximum amount of space that will be available at, say, on 6-month intervals or something? So we can have an idea of when the worst problem or the crunch time is going to hit.
Mr. Matuzik, I will go to you in a moment, but I'll take the opportunity as the chair's privilege to mention again to Ms. Riley, Mr. Hildy, and your colleagues that, excuse me, I think this is another example where you're really gonna relieve a lot of people's anxieties by just even very generous date ranges in your phasing diagram. You know, even if your phase 1 is 2025 to 2035 and your phase 2 is 2030 to 2040, you know, you're going to relieve anxieties just by being able to show people that, you know, we're not going to be doing garages until whenever. You've heard me say that before. I apologize to the extent that I'm taking up time. You know, sort of, I kind of feel like I'm kicking a dead horse. I feel like you're also somewhat in agreement, but I do feel compelled to mention it again. Ms. Riley, I see your camera is on. I had promised Mr. Matuzik that I would go to him next. So if you have a response to that, can I just ask you to incorporate it into your response to the next thing? Thank you, Matt. You're up.
I'll be quick. We can certainly try to get a little bit more information. The challenge, and I won't steal their thunder, is that there is only so far into the future in current market conditions that I think we can predict exactly what each segment is going to come in and when. I think to help us with that, we are going to be developing a a separate instrument that, beyond these individual small site area use permits, allows us to track what's happening across the site, and it is able to be more adaptable to any kind of sequencing of phases. Because I think you're right, it is going to require us to carefully monitor and assess what makes the most sense. But I think what somewhat gets lost in the conversation, purely because I haven't heard it yet, is this plan is not simply just incrementally removing parking, it's also removing existing units that were relying on that parking. And it's that balancing act of the people that were relying on those spaces are also shifting either somewhere else in the property or into new buildings that will try to be a little bit ahead of the renovation side of the equation too. So again, Jared Lynch can speak to this much more clearly, but the fact that existing units will be coming offline has a lot to do with what the actual true impact is of parking adjustments, I'll say.
And Matt, just Robert Gibson with DES Transportation. I think Mr. McCullen's point is really important. We've been pushing Jared to help us understand this data much more clearly. It is very complicated, as you've identified. In these next phases, we'll look at ways to communicate some of the changes and some of the fundamental assumptions and goals that we're going on. But staff's goal has been looking at this existing and future data and parking supplies. And what we're hoping to do is ensure that parking is not inequitably removed from around existing units to remain in a way that parking is lost, and particularly in places where units are not lost in association. And so I think doing that crosswalk for the best we can we'll work through as we get to the next phases. Some of this is there are some areas that it's harder to address. We've figured some of those out, and at least our initial analysis, we initially thought that your presumption that large lot would be one of the key points of challenge. We haven't found that yet, but I think that we have to do a little bit of trust and verify with both JERA, the county, and the community on ensuring that parking remains equitable to the users that remain within Barcroft.
Matt, you said you weren't going to steal our thunder. No, but I'm just going to echo real quickly what Matt and Rob have just said about parking and phasing. It really is going to be a balancing act. It's going to involve lots of coordination and communication from Jared Lynch, the county residents, whenever we're actually getting to those phases of taking parking offline and starting new construction. But we're already getting practice right now with the building renovation use permits, trying, as each of those happens, we have to relocate residents from the buildings into other buildings on site. And that's been a learning process from our team that will be able to take those lessons into the new construction projects. So we'll work on providing a little more information in the overall phasing plan to give you some better idea of the broad brush strokes of the phasing of new development across the site for a few years. But as we continue to implement the plan, that phasing plan is going to kind of change and grow as we get boots on the ground and start implementing use permits for the new construction. And then I'll also just highlight too, with each new construction use permit, we're going to be required to not only work with staff on tenant relocation, but also work with phasing of parking, our maintenance and traffic plans that we all have to do during construction there. So there are measures throughout, even when we get to the stage of actually taking the parking offline and implementing a new construction project, where we've got to report to the county, and all of that information will be available when we get going.
I understand that and appreciate that, and kind of, understand that seeing 10 years into the future or 20 years into the future is pretty difficult. So yes, and I guess all I'm sort of hoping for is that there is some analysis relatively far in advance of whatever happens, so that I can talk to our neighborhood and say, yeah, the new building is going up and that parking lot's going away, but it's all going to be fine. So I appreciate that, and I understand the complexity of it. I understand the lack of clarity of the future. So and I know that there'll be a lot of analysis coming up. It's just that's what I hear the most about, honestly.
Thank you, Ed and Glenn. And Ed, were you, just to be clear, you were asking about the Barcroft School and Civic League, right? Not the residents, not the Barcroft Apartments Residents Council.
I was actually asking about the Residents Council. Yeah, if anybody is present, anybody that actually lives on the property is in attendance tonight.
Whoops, sorry.
We don't have, well, I mean, Glenn, it's highly relevant. You know, the BSCL's responses are highly relevant, I think, here as well. We don't have, Mr. Matuzik, Nasante, correct me if I'm wrong. We don't have a residence council representative on the form-based code area working group, which is the body that's meeting tonight, as opposed to the extended working group. But the
yes, that's true. This is the group. Yes.
I'm sorry.
My apologies. That's true. Tonight is the smaller group. My apologies.
Well, you raise what is probably a question that's beyond all of our pay grades, but it's not. I think I've spoken with. I'm not the first person to say this, and I've heard it from other members of Douglas Park as well. Like it's not immediately clear that, like it might well be that Barcroft Apartments, should be its own representative at this table. But that's not something that's going to come out of this project. That's a much longer term and more grassroots conversation as well. But I can see a future where Barcroft Apartments is at this table at the same level as Douglas Park or Barcroft School and Civic League or whatever. Again, I'm not going to, that's 80,000 feet. Ms. Dye, I welcome you yelling at me if I've deserved that.
No yelling. I just wanted to mention that very early on, I asked that question. Did Gyre Lynch envision them becoming their own civic association and breaking off from Douglas Park? So that will not be a surprise to any of us in Douglas Park if that should happen in the future. So I did broach it quite some time ago, a year ago. I can't even remember, it was so long ago, but it was very early on. So it's not something that has not been put on the table before for consideration. And to be
I'm
fair,
relieved to know that someone from Douglas Park mentioned it before someone from
I did.
Neighboring neighborhood.
We're already a very big civic association with a huge mixture of housing types, and it's wonderful. Yeah. But Barcroft is so big that we will not be surprised if somebody says, you know what, I think we need to break off 2 years from now, 3 years from now, whenever it might be appropriate. No, we're not going to be surprised in the Douglas Park Civic Association.
And it could potentially triple in size with the number of units being built. Yeah.
Exactly, because of the significant amount of additional brand new units. So we will not be surprised or offended if this should happen sometime down the road. So it's been put out there.
We'll have a branding problem on our side of the pike, but that's also not for this group to deal with today.
Right. We have enough on our plates.
Do you have anything else, Linda?
I do not. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone else? Ms. Stahlheit, not to put you on the spot, or Noreen, or Ms. McWilliams, Just want to make sure that I've at least given everyone an affirmative opportunity. And Ms. Dye, your hand is back up, so I'll go back to you first.
I
Okay,
muted
Ms.
myself.
Stallhead.
I muted myself, but I did not remember to remove the raised hand.
Oh, I thought I saw it come back on.
Daniel, this is Michelle. Thanks for the opportunity. I've been, most of my questions have been answered around, I just had some questions about parking and things, but I think everything I had in mind has been addressed. Thanks.
I love it when that happens. Thank you. If there are no other questions, Ms. Sontag, I'll go to you in case there are any other updates that you want to run by us or other topics. Or Ms. Riley, if there's anything that you and your colleagues want to go over before we go to the other business part.
No, nothing left from our team. Thank you all again for your continued participation. It's good to see you, and look forward to starting to implement the plan in the future. Thank you all.
Very much likewise. Thank you.
The only other thing, kind of, is just to draw us back to the schedule forecast for the second half of 2024. We will be meeting, I think, at every meeting between now and the end of the year. But what's not on the screen are 2 other development applications that we hope to bring to you all in July and in September. In July, we're hoping to finally bring the frame shop to the AWG for review. So we'll keep you updated to see how that project is tracking ahead of that July meeting. I believe the meeting's scheduled for July 17th. And then the second application that we hope to bring to you in September is at 2300 9th Street. It's that older office building with the parking garage. And there's, I think, 16 townhomes proposed for that site. So that is tentatively scheduled for September. And we're hoping to get those moving so that then come October, November, December, we have those meetings available for all the other Barcroft form-based code amendments and new construction projects that we'll be reviewing with you. So lots of work ahead.
I think that's I think that's exciting news in both contexts. I mean, it's great to know that there's going to finally be some movement on the frame shop, and I think that, well, I'm not going to speak for Penrose about 2300, but I think that it's probably that that building is long in the tooth in its current form. Ms. Dye, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Any status on the Exxon redevelopment?
No, the applicant's been kind of in a holding pattern with that one, just exploring some of the staff comments that they received.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Hopefully we'll have an update for you in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
And any information to share? Maybe this is for Ms. McWilliams about the status of getting leased tenants in the Fillmore Gardens shopping center.
Yeah, Daniel. At this point, to be honest, the owner's in a bit of a fix. They don't have the money to do any kind of improvements, and there's been some, I think, vandalism, some of the HVAC units that are exterior on the backside of the 3 properties. So we literally just talked with them yesterday, and they need to figure out how they can get those spaces up to a point where they can be leased with no money. So we will see how those things progress. It's a bit of a tough space for everybody, the community and the property owner. And that's some unfortunate information we just got.
I'm sorry to hear that. Let me ask hypothetically related, let me ask an unrelated question that is tangential. with rather than asking hypotheticals, there's this news about the county not taking possession of, but taking responsibility for demolition of the Key Marriott building. What, who pays for that? Does the county send the landowner a bill if the county demolishes the building? And I'm deliberately avoiding hypotheticals here, Ms. McWilliams, because nobody wants it to get to that spot, right? But I can't help but think about the situation in Roslyn, and I am curious then about what happens if it in these kinds of should this kind of situation become that kind of situation? Let me put it that
Right.
way.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to think about is that they have an existing lease with the CVS, which I would believe is probably at least a 5, if not longer, year lease. And I don't honestly know what the situation would be should the county decide, like, how can you like take part of a property and not the whole one because you still have a paying tenant? And how that would all suss out.
And I can add, I won't speak for our ISD and our building staff, but at the county board hearing, I could try to paraphrase some of the feedback that they provided. But essentially, the conditions of these spaces, at least some of these spaces in the Fillmore Gardens Shopping Center, are largely just a vacancy issue. So they're not near the conditions of the Key Bridge Marriott and don't meet the criteria that you'd have to meet in order for the county to exercise raising the building.
And I think the challenge there is that there are at least 2 of those spaces that could potentially meet that condition, but not the entire property. So like, how do you determine what is something that the county would look at raising if the entire strip isn't in the same condition? So yeah, there's a whole lot of question marks here, guys.
And I think the key issue for, at least for the building official, is that those spaces are secured against entry. So I think that was the case. That was the issue with the Key Bridge Marriott, is that they could not secure it against entry, time after time. In this case, they're continuing to be able to do that at the Fillmore Gardens Shopping Center. So it's, at least from that perspective, secure and safe.
That is the major difference, right? Is
Yeah.
that it becomes that it's not clear that it's become an unmanageable health and safety and welfare situation, like it clearly had in Roslyn. Okay, but the sort of lingering question that the fundamental public equity question that I can't get out of my head is, if it does continue to get worse, and we're already in a situation where the landlord can't pay to bring it into a state of good repair, like, what, how does the county in a situation like that avoid being on the hook for someone else's responsibility, especially if they're in bankruptcy? And I'm curious because I haven't been, I wasn't involved in county issues in, I imagine, 2007, and when there have been, I haven't seen something like this happen before. But it just doesn't, it wouldn't seem right that the public would be on the hook for someone's for private property issues. But I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me on that point. So, but there probably aren't any good answers at this point, are there? All right. Well, thank you, Ms. McWilliams. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate the update. I think we all wish it was better news, but I take your point. Your point is well taken, that it's not advanced to and then Ms. Sontag, your point too, so it's well taken that it's not advanced to the situation that has transpired in Roslyn.
Yep. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you. Ms. Sontag, anything else?
Nope, I believe that's everything. The fourth renovation use permit for Barcroft is going to the county board this Saturday on the consent agenda. So kind of another exciting win. That'll be the last renovation use permit that the AWG will hear, at least I think this calendar year. So we might see those resume sometime next year.
Okay, great. If there is nothing else, I thank you everyone for your time, and thank you, Ms. Sontag, Mr. Matusik, your colleagues, Ms. Danowski, and your colleagues, Mr. Gibson, and I believe then that we can be adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thanks.
everyone.